But I wonder, Mr. Smith, if I could just say before we get started, I'd like to put on record most strongly my personal apology and sympathies with all sub-postmasters, their families and those affected by this. As we get into the conversation, obviously there'll be an opportunity for me to elaborate, but it just felt to me that was an important thing for me to say up front.
And you earlier referred to, when I asked about legal being a group function, you referred to legal being centralised in other group companies. Are you aware of another group of companies where legal is centralised at the group level or the parent level, and the subsidiary carries out or is responsible for prosecuting members of its own workforce?
No, I'm sure not.
Do you think Post Office Limited would have benefited from its own legal team?
Well, I would have liked its own legal team. I would have felt happier. I would have felt more accountable. I'm not saying to you that the problems would have been unearthed massively quicker as a result, but I would have been closer to the issue.
And what was stopping you from having your own legal team?
Well, it was not the proposed organisational structure, so it was a non-negotiable when I was being appointed.
Now, your evidence, which we will come to shortly, is that you were unaware that Post Office was involved in the prosecution of sub-postmasters until May 2009.
No, that's not quite right. I was unaware that the Post Office were the prosecuting authority, if you see what I knew there were court cases, but I didn't realise that Post Office, in about 2/3 of the cases, had initiated the prosecution.
I see.
As opposed to, the DPP or the police or whatever.
So,
just to clarify.
To clarify that, so you're saying you were aware that the business investigated theft, fraud, and false accounting, but you thought that it went to another agency for the prosecution.
And the expressions that you would typically see with things like the case went to court. And it was, and I now know, because I've pored all over this and I've checked all the figures, that about 1/3 went down that route, but 2/3 were the Post Office taking the decision to prosecute themselves.
And paragraph 59. Talks about the Risk and Compliance Committee, and about 5 lines down you say, to the best of my knowledge, the Risk and Compliance Committee was not given any information or reporting, nor did it have any oversight of the prosecution of SPMs. As a result, I did not take any steps as a member of the Risk and Compliance Committee to ensure that POL was acting in compliance with its legal obligations in relation to those prosecutions and civil proceedings against SPMs. I was not aware that they were taking place.
Correct.
That's saying in terms that the Post Office made decisions to prosecute, isn't it?
It does. It's not how I read it. This is my regret. I mean, there was a sort of high and mighty tone sometimes there, and people, it fed a sense of self-importance. It never occurred to me, reading that the Post Office was the sole arbiter of whether or not that criminal prosecution would proceed. I felt what they were saying was, we agree it's proceeding, but somewhere else had to agree to it going ahead.
Where did you get that assumption from, that it was somewhere else?
I had never come across a situation before where a trading entity could initiate criminal prosecutions themselves. So I'm not blaming others for this. It's my misunderstanding, but I just not encountered that type of situation, and I would have just read those in the vein of, we agree it should be done.
Do you think you should have known that Post Office was making those decisions?
I think I should. Yes, and that's clearly there are many regrets on many aspects of this, but that is one of mine that I didn't understand. I was going to call it a subtlety. That would be an insult. It's not a subtlety. It's really important, but it was a different nuance on it.
Could we please turn to Poll 2021421? Your evidence is still that at no point in the years that you were managing director, anyone in the security or investigation team raised the fact that they made decisions to prosecute.
Well, that is my position, definitely. I think it's sometimes what's said and what's heard. And the problem that I was bringing to the piece was I just had a presumption, and I didn't hear something sufficiently categoric to say, what, you mean we decide on our own and no one can stop us? I never asked that question. Well, no, when I say I never, I did obviously when we got to the Computer Weekly article, which we'll get to, but prior to that point, I had gone through not picking up that. And I'm not blaming them for not spelling it out enough. To be frank, I'm blaming me for not picking up on it.